What up, everybody? Colt Nerdcore, back with another video. This one will be a collection video for 2020. So this will start my normal yearly sectioning of where I do all my collection videos. I usually do it August to September. So for this year, I will have 3 collection videos I'll be doing. I'll be doing the Blu-ray collection, which is this one, a DVD collection, and then my PS4 collection update. Those will be the 3 I'll be focusing on this year. They're the 3 collections I feel that have grown enough substantially worth making another video over. I normally make a PS3 video as well because it's one of the main consoles I collect for. It's just since COVID, I haven't been able to go to all the mom and pop shops I usually go to, so there hasn't been a whole lot of selection for me buying for that. So I've mainly been focusing on the PS4 for this year, so that's why there will be no PS3 update for this year. I feel like there's no reason to make that video. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right into the Blu-ray collection. For these first 4 movies, they're going to be movies I just picked up recently from an Amazon order that came in. So they're not alphabetically in my collection yet, but 2 of them I've watched before, 2 of them I haven't. So this is Avengers Endgame. This is one I have watched. I watched this in the theaters when it came out. Avengers is probably, if not at least top 3 superhero franchises that have come out ever. It's really well constructed. There's a lot of intertwining stories. All the characters work really well together. There's a lot of likable ones. There's some that aren't great, but the majority of them have their own personalities and really add to the kind of universe this movie creates. I really enjoyed this one. It was cool to see in the theaters. I'd probably give this one like an 8. Alright, next up is Jennifer Body. This one, for some reason, has become a kind of early 2000s horror cult classic for some reason. I remember seeing this when it came out on like commercials and stuff like that, but I wasn't really into horror movies at the time, so I passed on it. Now that I'm big into horror movies, it's always one I wanted to pick up. I'm pretty sure this was the one I got on sale. I think it was like $7, so it's worth the price for admission. Hopefully it's decent. Alright, next up is Invisible Man. This was actually one I saw in the theaters right before they all shut down because of COVID. I actually really enjoyed this movie. The whole invisibility thing and figuring out how that all worked and how it intertwines with Elizabeth Moss's character. It was really interesting and it's very suspenseful. So I'd probably give this movie 7.8. I think it's pretty solid. Alright, then we got the Lara Croft Tomb Raiders. These are the Angelina Jolie ones. I never saw these. I know they're action movie like cult classics for like cheesy action. I'm hoping that they're just good fun to watch. I'm not looking for anything spectacular from these, so I'm hoping they're decent. Alright, now we got my small 4K Blu-ray collection. They're just too expensive for me to justify buying them right now, so I only buy a couple on Boxing Day when they're on sale. So this is Kingsman. This is the second one. I haven't watched either of them. I'm waiting to watch the first one before I watch this. I've heard they're pretty decent, just haven't got into them yet. Alright, next is Hacksaw Ridge. I really enjoyed this one. This is a Mel Gibson movie. This is one I was a little unsure going into it. I really liked the idea and the concept of it, but I didn't know how the execution was going to be. But after watching this, I was really amazed by this movie. The true story that it was based on is really quite amazing in itself, and I think the acting was good. The build up to the war was interesting. It wasn't like other war movies where before the war is really boring and lackluster on the character building. I thought that was really well done in this. I'd probably give this movie somewhere around an 8. Alright, next up is Solo. I think this movie gets a bad rap. I'm not saying it's an amazing Star Wars film. This is the Han Solo solo movie, the more recent one. I enjoyed this movie. I think it's a fun little Star Wars movie. It kind of reminds me of kind of the hate the Phantom Menace gets, where it's just cheesy and doesn't take itself seriously too much, and is not going for the serious dark undertones that Star Wars kind of throws in, and it kind of puts off a lot of people. I just find it a fun action movie and kind of learn a little bit more about Han Solo's past, and I just thought it was decent. It's like a 7. Alright, next up are the Aliens movies. This is the quadrilogy. So this is the first 4. I really enjoyed the first 2. I think the first 2 are classic horror movies, especially in the sci-fi genre. 3 and Resurrection's kind of where it goes off the deep end. They're not horrible, but they're definitely nowhere near the quality of the first two. I'd probably give the first one somewhere around like a 8.2. It's a classic horror movie. Aliens, good as well. I'd probably give it around a 7.9. And then Aliens 3 and Alien Resurrection are like a 5. They're average horror movies, but poor compared to the original two. Alright, next up is American Hustle. This is one that took me a couple watches to fully comprehend how good the writing is in this movie. The acting is amazing in this movie. This is a kind of drama thriller type movie with a lot of twists and turns, and really it's one of those movies where the first half has you a little confused on how these characters are all intertwining together and how the story is going to unfold, and then in the later half they kind of reveal like who's playing who and how the stories interconnect, and you're like, oh, okay. And then everything else, watching it through like the second time, you can pinpoint all these little like hints towards the ending and stuff like that. It's really interesting. I'd probably give it around somewhere like I'm gonna say 7.8. Alright, next up is the American Pie collection. So these are the first 4. I think there's only 2 others if I'm not mistaken. The first American Pie and the second American Pie are 2 of the kind of classics when you're looking at that crude comedy style. Definitely if you're not into cruder, like more vulgar comedy, don't get these. But if you're like me and are into it, the first 2 are classics in the genre. American Wedding's okay, it's not the worst. American Reunion's awful though. So for the first 2, I'd probably give them, if you're looking at them for in their genre, I'd probably give them like a 7.5. American Wedding's probably like a 6, and American Reunion's like a 4. Alright, next up is American Sniper. This is that Bradley Cooper movie that's based off of the Chris Kyle situation. For those of you who don't know, he was a Afghan war veteran, I'm pretty sure, and he was a sniper. He basically served 2 tours and then came home and was teaching people how to shoot in a firing range, and somebody that had mental health issues shot him while he was training. It's a sad story, but a very interesting one to learn about him. And I think this movie does him justice in terms of getting it decently right and also putting together a coherent story. I think Bradley Cooper did a good job in this. I'd probably give this movie somewhere like a 8.2. Alright, next up is Argo. This is an okay movie. It's about a government-like agency, and basically there are riots over the embassy being there. So there's like a violent takeover of the embassy by the people in the area, and it's about the people that work in the embassy faking to be a movie crew and trying to get out of the area that they're in. It's an okay movie. It's an interesting concept, just not as interesting in execution. I'd probably go like a 7. It's still a decent watch. Alright, next up is Avatar. This is like, whatever, the extended edition. I do like how this box art look. It's one of my favorite in terms of box art. This movie's good. I'm not one of those people that think this is one of the best movies of all time. Visually and sound effects wise, I think so, yes. But in terms of the actual story, I think it's a little lackluster in that sense. For me, I feel like this movie is like half an hour too long. There's a lot of sections that are very overly drawn out, and there's a lot of just weird sections that don't really make sense. I'd probably give it like a 7.5. Alright, next up is Marvel Avengers. This is the one that really set the tone for how these Avengers movies were going to work. We knew there was a couple of solo films out for each of these different superheroes, but we didn't know how they were going to work together. As I said before, all the characters in this really feel like they have their own unique part. You don't really get tired of a character, and they all work together really well. In terms of like how they're written in together, the lines with each other, and I really enjoyed this movie and the series. This is probably one of my favorites. I'd probably give this movie 8.5. Alright, next up is Batman v Superman. I haven't seen this yet. I'm looking to watch a couple of the Wonder Woman and Man of Steel movies before I get onto this one. I just haven't got around to it. I'm hoping it's good, but I haven't watched it myself yet. Alright, next up is Battle Royale. I would definitely say, in terms of how I view it, this is one of the hidden gems when it comes to movies that I've seen, and that's very few compared to a lot of people that collect movies. But this one, I find a lot of people who have seen it love it, and it's a cult classic. But I find there's a lot of people who've heard of it but haven't watched it. 42 Kids are taken on a bus, they're gassed, and then they wake up with collars around their neck that will explode in a certain amount of time if they don't kill all the other classmates beside themselves. So it follows two students primarily and about them trying to get out. It's very interesting and a really fun watch. I'd probably give this movie somewhere around like a 8.5. Alright, next up is Beowulf. This is probably as decent as an action movie as you get. This is like a fantasy movie. It has a weird they went for like a weird half CGI, half real life look to the movie. So it always looks kind of off while you're watching it. If you like the fantasy genre, you'll definitely enjoy this one. It's not an amazing movie, but it's decent. I'd probably give it like a 7. Alright, next up is the Bourne movies. So this is the first 4. It doesn't have the most recent one. Basically, the first 3 movies are amazing and classic action movies. And the 4th one, the guy does a decent job, but the writing and story that he was given was really weak. So the first 3 movies, I'd probably give them somewhere around like an 8.3 each. And then the 4th movie, I'd probably give like a 5. It's an average action movie. Alright, next up is Braveheart. This is one of those movies that I really enjoy the last half, but the beginning half, it's very boring for me. It's very slow. It definitely sets up the reasoning for the rest of the movie. All the interesting stuff happens in the last half. For those of you who don't know, this is supposed to be based off of William Wallace, and it's a Mel Gibson acted movie. He did a pretty good job in this. This is a classic. I'll probably give this movie somewhere around like a 7.8, 7.9-ish. Alright, next up is Brotherhood of Blades. This is a Chinese kind of action movie. It's about 3 brothers who kind of all have their own like dark secrets and them working together to kind of fight their way through basically all their demons. It's a little more explained with that, and there's like a love triangle going on. It's pretty interesting. Mainly what you're getting this movie for is the action scenes. The action scenes are really well done. They're very flashy, really good camera work, and the choreography is great in this movie. I'd probably give it somewhere around like a 7.5. It's definitely a good watch. Alright, next up is what a lot of people are tired of hearing is the best Christmas movie of all time. But I agree it's the best movie of all time if you're looking for a Christmas movie, which is A Christmas Story. This is the perfect blend of comedy and a good family movie that everybody can watch. Each age group has jokes that will land with them and not other age groups, so there's always new stuff to figure out when you're growing up, and it's just a great movie. This movie basically follows a family, and mainly Ralphie, focusing on his perspective of his family's, and takes place in I think a total of 3 months before Christmas and up to Christmas. It's very interesting and there's a lot of fun. If you're looking for a good Christmas movie, if you haven't seen it, I'd give this movie somewhere like a 9. Alright, next up is The Conjuring. This is probably my favorite horror movie of all time. It's really the one that got me into my love of horror movies, which is pretty recent. This is one of those modern horror movies where they use jump scares, but it's the right amount. There's not too much of it. There's a lot of story building and character building. These two back here who play the kind of demon finders, or like they go around curing people's demon problems. They carry this movie. They are great together, and it's really interesting learning about the demons with them type thing. Overall, this is just a really good modern horror movie, and if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. This movie is probably a 9.1 for me. It's probably a little high for most people, but it's just really the movie that got me into horror. Alright, next up is Contagion. This is one of those movies that is very slow off the start and slowly builds up after building up all these different characters and kind of tying all the stories together. It's about a virus outbreak and kind of how all these different stories connect. People that are doctors, people that are reporters, there's people trying to find out alternative cures, and it's kind of just how all their stories tie together and correlate and build throughout the time of this pandemic. It's pretty interesting. The end half is definitely the more interesting part. So for that reason, I'll give it a 7. Alright, next up is Contraband. This is probably as average as an action movie as you can get. It's a good fun watch if you want something to just kind of turn off the old mind and just watch some decent action scenes and some funny dialogue and some fighting. This is a movie. It's just an average action movie, probably like a 5. All right, next up we got the Deathray series. So I got 3 of them. I think there was a recent 4th one. But basically this goes, anything after 1 is awful. But the first one, I believe, is a hidden gem, actually. I really enjoy the first one. I think it's a really underrated action movie and has good enough characters and twists to make it worthwhile. 2 and 3 are just kind of copies of the first one without doing it well as well. Overall, the first one I'd probably give around an 8. The second one I would probably give around a 5, and the third one's not great. I'd probably give it like a 4. All right, next up, this is Django. This is a Western made by Quentin Tarantino, so it definitely has his over-the-top kind of weird artsy style mixed in with comedy, mixed in with a dark and gritty story. So if you're familiar with the Quentin Tarantino films, you're getting the same formula in this. It's very well done, very well acted. It's just a solid movie. I'd probably give it somewhere like an 8. Alright, next up is Dredd. Probably one of my favorite action movies of all time. And I think really underrated, or at least really under talked about in my opinion. This movie is, if you're big into action, especially sci-fi action or like futuristic action, this is one of the best. Dredd's basically a futuristic cop after the world's kind of gone to shit, and he basically goes into this apartment complex ruled by this gangster and kind of goes through and takes down her whole organization. A lot of fight scenes, a lot of gun scenes, and it's just a good fun watch if you're into action movies. I'll probably give this movie somewhere around at 8.5. Alright, Enemies at the Gate. I remember this being a lot better when I was younger. There's too much of a romance going on in this movie, and it kind of just takes away from the seriousness of the content of the war. It's still a decent movie, but I would just say it's an average 5 movie. It's basically a war movie based in, I'm pretty sure, Russia, and it's just about parts in World War II. There's a romance plot as well. It's not my type of war movie. Alright, then we got the 2 Fast and Furious movies I own, which is Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, which is the 3rd one, and Fast and Furious 6. I mainly prefer the spin-off of Fast and Furious 3. I think it's the best out of the ones I've seen. Fast and Furious 6 is good. I don't follow and enjoy the main story as much as I do Fast and Furious 3. I just think Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift is just the most fun the series have had, and it's just a great watch, and there's cool cars, the drifting's cool, it's a decent enough story to keep it going, the music's awesome. Where Fast and Furious 6 is kind of just more the generic over-the-top action movie. Both still fun watches. I'd probably give Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift somewhere like a 7.5, while Fast and Furious 6 gets like a 7. Alright, the next up we got Full Metal Jacket, which is probably, at least in my top 3 war movies of all time that I've seen. I really enjoy this one. There's definitely a darker take on war. It follows a battalion or going through their basic training. So they basically go through all the training camps with their instructor, goes through all the psychology of being somebody going through these training camps, at what it does and breaks down people, and then kind of follows them going into war for the, I would say, last quarter of the movie. So it's definitely interesting learning about all the different characters, their unique personalities, and it's just a really good watch. If you're into war movies, it's definitely a classic that you need to pick up. I would say this is like an 8.5. Alright, then next up, there's all the Game of Thrones. I have all 8 seasons, so I'm pretty sure everybody knows what Game of Thrones is, but Game of Thrones is basically a fantasy, drama, action TV show. Super famous, so I think everybody should know about it mostly. If not, it's basically a lot of politics, a lot of action scenes where warring houses and fighting over power to rule the kingdoms, and with a kind of undead army coming at them at the same time, and all the regions slowly learning about this. There's a lot of different aspects and parts of this show. I just really enjoyed it. So the first 2 seasons are probably some of the best. I would say everything up to the 4th season is probably a solid 9. So here is the 3rd and 4th one. I really like how these boxes look. I always thought how these series made their Boxes for these is very clean. They always have good artwork to them. So here's 5 and 6. I think 5 and 6 are probably somewhere in the, I would say 8s. They're still good, and they have their good parts to them. They're just, you can tell the writing is slowly getting worse throughout the series. And then finally you get to 7 and 8, which 7 is probably like a 7. There's still some decent parts. They definitely tie up a few of the character stories well. But they also lead on to a bunch of different stuff that really helps hinder the story, where 8 just ruins a lot of the characters. 8's like a 3. And then this is just kind of the extra thing that came with it. You kind of learn about the lore of Game of Thrones. I haven't watched it yet, but I'll probably get to watch it eventually. Alright, the next up is Gangster Squad. This is a action mob movie. It's kind of like a drama. It just follows a squad going around taking down all these different mobs. It's kind of an average mob movie. It's not great. It's decent. If you want a decent watch that you can watch maybe once or twice, I would say pick up this movie, but only if you can get it for cheap. I give this movie like a 6. It's a above average movie. Alright, next up is Goodfellas. While the other one was an average mob movie, this is probably the best mob movie. I also have not seen The Godfathers yet, so if people think The Godfather are better, definitely I cannot give my opinion on that. But I've seen Goodfellas, and Goodfellas is by far my favorite. This is a classic mob movie. Really good, very well acted. Basically follows the story of somebody growing up through the mob, and how it kind of impacted his life all the way throughout his life, and how it slowly drives him, 1, to kind of lose his mind, and 2, to kind of lose his life and all the glory that comes with being in the mob. It's a really good watch if you haven't seen it, and it's definitely a classic. I'd probably give this movie like a 9. Alright, next up is God Van Be Gone. This is definitely one of those movies that you watch it once because the main thing you're watching this movie for is the twists and turns. And after you kind of know that, the movie's not as interesting to watch. But for what this movie is, it's pretty good. It's a drama based off of, I think it's somebody losing their kid and trying to locate where the kid is throughout this movie, and follows a PI going around. A decent movie, has really good twists and turns, some pretty good acting. I'd probably give it somewhere like a 7.5. Alright, next is Gone Girl. This movie scares the crap out of me. This is basically the classic bunny boiler movie, if you've seen or know that term. So it's basically some guy's life's basically getting ruined because he has a crazy girl that he's dating, and she's slowly and methodically ruining his life through very sick and twisted ways. So this is basically learning all about that, and it's really well acted, and it's a really interesting concept, and it's really well executed. Just, it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies, to be honest. Overall, I'd give the movie like somewhere around 7.5, though. It's a good watch. Alright, next up is Goodbye World. When I first was starting to watch this, I thought I found a hidden gem. This was in like a Walmart like $5 bin, and I was watching it, and the first half was really interesting. It's like a post-apocalyptic movie about a bunch of friends that come together at somebody's like farm and kind of try to work out how they're going to get through this event, and kind of try to piece together how it all started and why it's happening. And then basically the end half takes the whole movie out to the barn and shoots it in the head, because basically they sum it up by basically everybody to do with this entire apocalypse that's important to this entire apocalypse happens to be the people on the farm that are all friends. It's like coincidence after coincidence after coincidence type thing, and it seems like they wrote themselves in a corner and then kind of just gave up on trying. This movie's like a 4. Alright, next up is probably my favorite series of all time. I know this wasn't in my top 10 movies of all time. The reason why is because I believe individually as movies, these movies aren't as strong as other movies that I have seen, but together as a cohesive story, I think this is my favorite franchise of all time. This or Star Wars. So this is Harry Potter. For those you don't know, it's about witches and wizards. and a bunch of kids growing up all through these 8 films at school Hogwarts, where they learn about how being witches and wizards, and you learn about the school. There's a guy named Lord Voldemort who kind of hunts down Harry Potter, who's the main character, and it's about them, this war slowly brooding up between the good and evil while the school's going on, and then kind of piecing together how they're going to stop him. In terms of my favorites, it would probably be either 1, 4, or the last one, or Prisoner of Azkaban. The only one that's really not that great is 7, because it's a lot of filler for 8, but it ties up a lot of story elements. Overall, I'd probably give this series somewhere like a 9.5. It's one of my favorites. Alright, next up is A History of Violence. This is a mobster-ish movie where basically this guy is or is not a ex-mobster. Basically, a group of mobsters come to his town and pin him as an ex-mob head who's kind of dipped out of the life and is kind of on the run from them. And he doesn't remember anything about it, or is at least playing off possibly that he is, and does not know about anything about it. So it's basically this movie playing itself out and trying to figure out if he is or if he's not a mobster, and kind of learning along with his family about what's actually going on. It's a good watch. I definitely say it's a solid like 7.5. Alright, next up is Horrible Bosses. This is a comedy. Basically, these 3 at the bottom here are working for these 3 at the top. They're all awful bosses in their own rights, and they kind of make a plot to kill them. So it's just about them going through all these goofy and silly ways of trying to kill them, and just basically follow them being complete idiots about it. It's a funny movie. I definitely recommend it over the second one, and I'd probably give it somewhere like a 7. Alright, next up is The Hobbit. I have the extended edition. These movies, I think, get a lot of bad rap because they're not the Lord of the Rings, and they're not as well written and well received as the Lord of the Rings series, but I still think these movies are amazing. The story about it's very interesting. It's definitely a good add-on to the Lord of the Rings universe, and I think they're great movies in their own right. I think comparing them to the Lord of the Rings, where people go wrong with this series, there's definitely a more lighthearted tone, at least for the first movies. I definitely say these are still great Lord of the Rings movies and classic fantasy movies. I just don't think they've had the time for people to really appreciate them. I'd probably give it like a 8.5. Alright, next up is It. This was a modern horror movie I decently enjoyed. I saw this one in the theaters and I thought it was pretty good. It's like a coming-of-age movie mixed with a horror movie. It's based off of a book and basically follows these kids here and their battle with Pennywise, the clown, and kind of going through growing up while being hunted by this clown that targets kids in their neighborhood, and kind of finding a way to defeat him. It's a good movie. Got some good slow building scares in it. It's not the most scary movie in the world. It's not the greatest horror movie in the world. But it's definitely a solid 7.5. The second movie is not that good though. Alright, next up is Indiana Jones. Classic adventure movies. These are just silly, fun, over-the-top adventure movies with Harrison Ford in it. These are very classic movies. This is the 4 of them. Basically the first 3 are amazing. First one probably being my favorite, then the third, then the second. They're probably all around 8.5 to, I would say the first one's a 9 for me. Where the 4th one is awful. It's not like terrible, but it's not good. That's when they try to reboot the franchise and kind of continue it a little later on with Shia LaBeouf. I'd probably give that one like a 5. Alright, then we got John Wick, one of my favorite movies of all time, and probably close to my favorite action movie of all time. I just think this series is some of the coolest action I've seen on the screen. It's just over the top, fun, really well choreographed action scenes, both with guns, cars, swords and just fist fighting. Keanu Reeves is a badass in this movie, and this is one of my favorites of all time. I probably go like a 9.5. Alright, next up is Kick-Ass 2. I got this on sale for $5. Haven't watched the first one or the second one, but I plan to watch the first one soon and get into this one. I'm hoping they're good. I've heard of their kind of cult classics. Alright, next we got the Kill Bills. This is the double collection, so it just has a little information about them on the back. They're classic action movies, and they're basically classic Quentin Tarantino movies, where it has that comedy mixed with the actual serious and dark story that's going on. Mixed with, in this one at least, pretty good choreographed action. If you're looking for a classic action movie, this is one I definitely recommend. Probably give them both somewhere like an 8. Alright, then we got The Last Rites. This is basically somebody's attempt at being a Quentin Tarantino film. It's basically a western following this lady here, pretty sure trying to get revenge for her husband or something like that. Basically her hunting down a bunch of bounty hunters, I'm pretty sure. Meeting a bunch of characters along the way to help her. Tries to go for that Quentin Tarantino-esque vibe. It does it okay, but it's just an average western that has a lot of action in it. It's probably like a 5 or a 6. Alright, next up is the Lego Movie. I know this movie is literally just a walking ad for Legos, but I find it fun. It's definitely not an amazing movie, but I'm fine saying for a kids movie this is a pretty good watch. And I think there's a lot of adult humor that people of any age can get, and it's really just a fun little watch. I don't really like the out of Legos part with the dad and the kid. I get that's the meaning behind the movie in terms of like the inner workings of the movie, but I just enjoy the Lego parts, and I think there's some good jokes in it. So I give this movie probably like a 7. Alright, then we got Looney Tunes. These are the classic TV show cartoon. This is like the Platinum Collection. I think this is volume 1. Fantastic classic TV. Great to put these on like before going to bed and just relive some of the classics. This whole like TV show is probably like a 9. It's some of the best done cartoon shows out there. Alright, next up is Looper. This is basically one of those movies where past self is getting hunted by future self. I'm pretty sure Gemini Man follows the same thing if you've seen that and not this. This is basically the one that did it first. It's pretty good. Very well acted. Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis do really well in this. It's interesting enough and has some actual pretty good sci-fi action scenes. So if you're looking for a good action movie with a pretty decent story, I definitely give this one a watch. It's like 7. Alright, then we got Lord of the Rings. Amazing fantasy movies. Probably the best out there. If you haven't seen these films and you're any sort of interested in getting into the fantasy genre or into the fantasy genre already, these are definitely ones I would recommend getting into if you can. They're long, so if you're not into long movies, that's the one thing I would say stay away from them. But you can even segment watching them. The first one is probably my second favorite. Second one's my favorite, and the third one is still amazing as well. I'd probably give first one probably like a 9. Second one probably like a 9.7. It's my favorite and it has some of the coolest action scenes I've ever seen on screen. And then the third one I probably give a 9 as well. Alright, next up is The Martian. I actually really like this movie, and I've watched it probably 8 or 9 times now. It's just one of those movies that you're sitting there watching. It's interesting as heck, and really keeps you gripped to the stream as you're watching it. This movie is basically about Matt Damon, who is part of a team that gets sent to Mars, and there's a storm that hits Mars, and basically they're forced to evacuate, but he gets left behind. And it's about him surviving on Mars and waiting for rescue if he can get to him. And it kind of has Castaway vibes, but I find a lot more interesting than Castaway, dealing with all the space and him communicating back with Earth and kind of going through his psychology and of still being there and what it's doing to his brain and body. and it's just very interesting to watch. If you haven't watched it, I'd highly recommend it. I'd probably go like an 8.5. Alright, then we got the Maze Runner movies. I haven't got the third one yet, but I plan to get it in the future. The first one I really enjoyed. If it's kind of Hunger Games-esque, where it's about kids being sent into like a kind of maze and trying to find their way out of it. It's kind of like a, I would say simulation, but simulation in real life where they actually die if they get killed. And Scorched Trails kind of follows them outside of the maze and trying to figure out kind of what's going on and trying to figure out who to believe, who not to believe about like warring factions. I would say the first one's probably like I would say 7.5, where the second one's like a 7. And then we got some of the most classic action movies of all time, which is the Mission Impossible series. This is up to, this is up to Rogue Nation, so it doesn't have the most recent one in it. I really like this Steelbook personally. I think it's really cool. I think this was a Best Buy exclusive, if for any of those wondering. These movies are classic Tom Cruise action movies, very over the top, have a good amount of comedy in them. Tom Cruise plays them really well. His action scenes and stunt work is great as always. They're just really cool, really fun action movies to watch. Later in, when I think his name's Sean Bean, if I'm correct, gets introduced as his kind of assistant, definitely the comedy writing and comedy aspects definitely shoot up a lot, and it becomes a lot funnier. And overall, this series is just one that constantly improves on itself. I really enjoy these movies. I probably give them, on average, like a 8.5. Alright, then we got one of my favorite movies of all time, and definitely my favorite comedy movie of all time, which is Napoleon Dynamite. This is like the 10-year anniversary cover. This movie basically embodies, and in my opinion is the best example of stupid comedy, where it's comedy that's supposed to be very dumbed down and appear stupid, but it's actually really smart in how it's written and really well acted, and it's a very hard genre to perfect, and I feel like this movie perfects it. It basically follows Napoleon Dynamite and kind of all of his growing up through high school and kind of all the stuff him and his family get up to, and his friends, all just like adventures and kind of just goofy stuff that they go through high school. It's very funny if you're into that style of stupid humor or like dry humor. So I probably give this movie somewhere like a 9.5. Alright, next up is November Man. This is basically as average as a like kind of action secret agent movie as you get. It's basically about this older secret agent hunting down a younger secret agent that he pretty sure helped train, and this girl's involved somehow. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure she's the target of him. And kind of the back and forth between the two agents, and him winning a battle, them winning a battle, and kind of figuring out everybody's motives. It's an average action movie. I'd probably give it slightly above average at like a 6. Alright, the next up we got Oblivion. This is a interesting movie. It's a Tom Cruise movie, and it's a very futuristic movie. It's based off of, there's like these people that have taken over, and they have people like Tom Cruise kind of watching these checkpoints in order to, it's either to keep power or keep people like caged in or something like that. And you kind of learn about the unraveling of Tom Cruise's world and what he thinks is correct and what is actually happening. And Morgan Freeman's character helps him kind of realize the truth, and you kind of learning along with Tom Cruise, and it's very interesting once all of his world starts falling apart, learning about it, and it's definitely a good watch. I'd probably give it like an 8. Alright, then we got absolute classics in the Ocean series. This is Oceans 11, 12, 13. So this is a triple pack, so it comes with the plane just about each movie. Super cool bank heist movie with a bunch of characters that each have their own personalities. And it's all about them like smooth talking and tricking their way into robbing banks, robbing, I'm pretty sure, art galleries, and a couple others. It has a good interlocking story between the three. I would say definitely 11 is probably my favorite. These movies are probably a solid 8. Alright, next up is The Patriot. This is a very non-realistic take on the Civil War in America. Basically how Confederation started for the Americans and how they gained their independence. So it follows Mel Gibson and basically him being a farmer, and then the British coming in and taking over his farm. I'm pretty sure killing his wife and kid, and then him going into war against the British and kind of teaching them how to use guerrilla tactics in order to take down the British type thing. It's very over the top and very propaganda heavy in terms of how actual history went, but it's a fun watch. I'd probably give it like a 7. Alright, next up is Pulp Fiction. This is an amazing movie. It's very interesting to watch, very well acted. Has some great comedy parts mixed in with some, I don't know, kind of cool pieces together of stories where each character interacts together, and then there's kind of just these cool, memorable scenes. Definitely, if you're looking for a movie that there's a lot of memorable lines and scenes from, this is one movie. I'd probably give this movie like an 8. Alright, next up are the Purge movies. These are modern horror movies, which basically, if a group took over the government and basically made it so one day a year, basically all crimes are legal, besides like using like military grade weapons. So basically this one follows a family who lets somebody in that's running from a group of purgers and kind of follows them defending their house from the purgers. And this one follows a group of mismatching survivors who are out during purge night for various reasons, all coming together to try to survive the night. Definitely I think Anarchy is the best out of the series. I think these are the only two good ones out of the series. The first one I probably give it like a 7. It's more of like a typical horror movie, whereas Anarchy goes for a more action horror movie where it's kind of just you go from one scene to the next scene to the next scene, learning about different people on purge night and just like crazy action scenes happening. I definitely think this is the route they should take with this movie going forward and the series going forward. But that's just me. I'd give this one like a 7.3. Alright, next up is Reservoir Dogs. This is my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. I think this one for me interests me the most because it's like a after crime kind of mobster-ish movie, but it's basically about a bunch of people who just finished robbing, I think it was a bank or something, and the plan kind of goes wrong, and they meet up at their hideout, and it's all about them figuring out who's the rat in the group and kind of egos and kind of concerns clashing together and slowly leading them all to distrust each other and kind of how that all unfolds from there. It's a really interesting movie. And if you're into that genre at all, I would definitely recommend checking it out. I'd probably give this movie somewhere around, I would say like a 8.7. Alright, next up is The Revenant. This is the movie Leonardo DiCaprio finally won his Oscar for. This movie basically is about a guy trying to survive in the wilderness while being separated from his, I think it's colony. I think it's back when they were trying to colonize North America, if I'm not mistaken. But basically it's him surviving in the cold winter, and you kind of follow his story. And it's very interesting. It's a little long, I would say, and some parts are a little drawn out. It's a good movie, a little long for me, as I said, so I'd probably go like 7.8-ish. Alright, next up is Rings. This is the remake of the Rings movie. So this movie is basically about Salma, and it's about her being kind of alive through a video that people watch. And basically after they watch them, she comes alive and kills them after 7 days. It's a horror movie. This one I think is one of the only horror movies where I'd say I prefer the remake over the original. I don't think in terms of story there's much difference and it's much better, but I think the upgrade in terms of the graphics and in terms of the special effects you can use really benefited this movie, especially with a lot of it being taken through stuff like dealing with electronics and stuff like that. I feel like this movie definitely benefited from that. So I'd give this movie like a 7. Alright, next up is Salt. This is Angelina Jolie. This is a spy movie. It's a decent movie. It kind of goes for like the female Bond or Mission Impossible kind of vibe, where she's like kind of, look at me, I'm awesome, spy, and kind of just follows her, completing a mission. I don't remember what the main premise of the story is about. I've only watched it once, but I remember it being pretty decent. I remember not being as interested of other spy movies I've watched. So I probably give this movie like a 7. Alright, next is Scarface. I really like the Steelbook. I think it's pretty clean. But overall, this is a pretty good movie. This is an Al Pacino movie. This is about Scarface going over to the US and kind of starting the cocaine and going into the US and really building up his empire. And this is a classic mobster movie. Definitely if you're into mobster movies or crime movies at all, or really just interested in the story of Al Capone, or you're just interested in the story in general, I would definitely recommend it. It's a great movie. Just for me, it was a little long, and certain parts seemed a little drawn out. I'd give this movie like an 8.2. Alright, next up is Shawshank Redemption. This is one that very barely made it off of my top 10 of all time. I really enjoy this movie, and I'm not usually into the whole deep meaning, super serious kind of undertones throughout the movie, and really focusing on the message, and a lot of sad parts in it type of movies. But this movie's an exception. This movie's just so well written, so well acted, and it's just one of those classics like Green Mile, where you just have to appreciate how well the movie's made and how well it's written, and just how well this movie comes together. It's about a guy who gets sent to prison, and it's about his rough times and good times through prison, and kind of him growing as a person through prison, and meeting all these different characters and seeing them throughout the prison and dealing with like corrupt cops. And it's a really amazing movie with an awesome ending. This movie's like a 9. Alright, next up is Shooter, and in my opinion, Mark Wahlberg's best action movie. I know he has better movies where he's in the kind of comedy role, but this movie is definitely my favorite of his action movies. It basically follows him as it was either Navy or Army officer who is an elite sniper, and they basically hire him to figure out where an assassination attempt would be taking place on the president, and kind of use him as bait. And that's about him trying to figure out who set him up and kind of unsolve the mystery of that and get back at him. It's a very interesting movie, and I would highly recommend it if you're into any sort of drama or action movies. I'd give this movie like an 8. Alright, next up is this is a very well done movie, and probably besides Inception, my favorite Leonardo DiCaprio movie. This movie's about Leonardo DiCaprio coming to this island, which is like a mental asylum or a mental like health institution, and basically trying to figure out if they're corrupt or harming the patients as a private investigator, and kind of him solving the secrets out of the island. And then there's a big twist reveal at the end that really kind of shines a new light of all the clues you were experiencing throughout watching this. And it's a really good movie. If you're into, it has some horror elements to it, like there's some creepy atmospheres in it, but it's not really a horror movie. It's more of a drama or kind of whodunit movie. If you're into any of those genres, I would highly recommend it. It's like an 8.5. Alright, next up on Snakes on a Plane. This is a classic Samuel L. Jackson movie, which is basically one of those ones where you turn off your brain and just watch some cheesy action happen on your screen. It's basically snakes get on a plane because of somebody set it up there, and Samuel L. Jackson going around killing the snakes and trying to figure out who put those snakes on his plane. And that's basically the movie. It's kind of very cheesy, but it's a fun watch. It's like a 5, but it's a good 5. Alright, next up is Spaceballs. This is a classic comedy movie. If you're into Star Wars at all, or into sci-fi at all, you'll really enjoy this movie. It's basically a mockery of the sci-fi genre, especially Star Wars, but it does it really well. This is a
classic comedy. It's kind of up there and kind of very reminiscent of Big Trouble in Little China, if you've seen that movie as well. It's good fun. It kind of just follows roughly the plot of Star Wars, but in a very comedic way. Very well done comedy. It's not super crude, but it has crude undertones. It's definitely one you can watch with the family above like 15. It's a good movie. I'd highly recommend it if you're into comedy at all or into Star Wars at all. You'll get a good kick out of it. I'd probably give this movie like a 8.5. Alright, next up is Star Wars. This is the first 6 films. In my opinion, it probably goes A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back. I'm actually a big fan of The Phantom Menace, so it probably is third for me, mainly because I grew up on it, and I think it has some of the best action scenes out of the Star Wars scene, especially the Darth Maul, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan fight. That scene's amazing. And then probably Return of the Jedi, Revenge of the Sith, Attack of the Clones. So these movies are fantastic, and probably the whole series, I'd give it like probably a like 9.1 on average, just because some of them aren't that good. But a new Hope is probably a 10 for me. It's my favorite movie of all time. Alright, next up is Suicide Squad. This is basically a movie about Harley Quinn and Deadshot with a bunch of people you don't really know from the Batman universe going around and solving and basically dealing with a superhero or supernatural kind of issue that the city's having that they need some people to deal with. So they basically hire a bunch of supervillains and basically say, if you solve this issue, you all go free and win your freedom back. So they basically have the Suicide Squad, where the name comes from it, and they go through and kind of deal with the problem. It's a decent movie. I wouldn't say it's amazing. Definitely deserves some of the hate to get, but I think Margot Robbie does a great job with Harley Quinn. And for what this movie is, I enjoy it. I know it's nothing to be taken seriously or think it's one of the great movies of all time, but it's definitely a fun watch. I'd probably give it like a 7.2-ish. Alright, next up is Sword of Vengeance, or Slow Mo, the movie. This is basically a movie that has a very interesting concept. It's a medieval movie about this guy. I can't remember exactly what it is, but basically he's from a small village, and basically he got picked up and healed by the village, and then basically saves the lives of some of the people in the village from a corrupt kingdom or castle that's kind of mooching off of the village, and he kind of sitting there and is the Sword of Vengeance for the village. It has an interesting concept, but in every single fight and every single second of this movie is basically using slow-mo to drag out the movie because it's so short. It's not a good movie. It has a good concept. Some of the action scenes are kind of cool, but the use of slow-mo and how dragged out this movie is, it's like a 4. Alright, next up is Top Gun. This is the 30th anniversary steelbook, probably one of my favorites. This movie is a absolute classic. It's one of those just cool guy movies where you're watching it and you're sitting there like, wow, this is badass. It's basically Tom Cruise going through flight school and eventually being a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and kind of following his climb to the top and dealing with all of his rival like squad mates, and then eventually dealing with some combat. It's just a cool movie that you're sitting there the whole time just being like, wow, this movie's awesome, and just a whole lot of fun to watch. And I'm hoping they don't butcher it with the second one that's coming out. They probably will, but looking forward to seeing it at least. So this movie is probably like a 8.6. Alright, next up is Troy, which is basically a movie covering the Battle of Troy, and basically is between rivaling kingdoms led by Achilles and Hector, and basically follows these two legendary civilizations basically clashing over the city of Troy. It is a really good and really well choreographed action movie. Brad Pitt does a really good job in this, same with Orlando Bloom. and a lot of the other characters. The action pieces are really good. The action's good. The story's decent enough to keep the action moving. And learning about the different characters and how they interact and the inner workings of the cities and being royalty at this time. And Achilles himself growing as a person throughout the movie and kind of his like cockiness throughout the movie kind of keeps you interested. And it's just a really good action movie. I'd probably give this movie like a 7.7-ish. Next up, we have Unforgiven. This is a Western movie. It's a Clint Eastwood movie. I'm pretty sure about him going to kind of do he's like an ex bounty hunter and going through with his old crew and some younger people doing kind of his last bounty. I'm pretty sure it's like a rivalry thing or a threat to his homestead or something like that. I haven't seen this movie in a very long time, but I bought it because it's a classic and I really enjoy this movie. This is just a really good Western. If you're into Westerns at all, as one I would highly recommend if you haven't seen it. I'd give this movie like an 8.5. Alright, next up is A Walk Among a Tombstone. This is a Liam Neeson classic crime thriller where somebody goes missing. He's trying to find them and trying to figure out who did it and hunt them down and get vengeance on them type thing. And he has help from this kid here, kind of helping him research information about doing all the technical stuff that he's not great at. So if you've seen Taken, you know exactly how this movie is going to go. It's definitely still a fun watch. I'd give it like a 7. Alright, next up is World War Z. And I think with the plethora of zombie movies out there, I think this is one of my favorites. Brad Pitt does a great job in this movie, and the action scenes and just like the scale of this movie is really interesting to watch. It basically follows Brad Pitt figuring out kind of how to work through a zombie apocalypse. He's basically like an top soldier in the U.S. Army who basically gets called back to help figure out an outbreak and figure out the cure for the outbreak by escorting a scientist around who's like one of the top in the field and is supposed to be like the leading expert of trying to figure out what's going on and how to fix everybody. So he basically travels the world seeing all these different places and how they're dealing with the virus and trying to figure out a cure for it. It really is just a really cool movie to watch. I'd give this movie like an 8.5. Alright, next up is Zombieland. It's another zombie movie. This one takes a little different take of World War Z, where World War Z is very serious. This is just a comedy movie. Basically follows these two at the beginning, and they basically pick up these two, and it's about all their relationships kind of forming, as well as distrust building, and about them kind of coping, working together, while trying to solve issues within themselves, all through comedy. It's the same people that made Superbad, as the thing says at the front. So if you know how Superbad is, with a lot of crude comedy, a lot of crude jokes, and just like over the top, like cheesy little funny action scenes, that's basically what you get from this movie. It's definitely a funny watch. So I'd recommend it. I'd give it like a 7.9. Alright, next up is Two Guns. This is a really good action movie that came out pretty recently. I think it's like 3 years ago. But this movie basically follows a FBI agent and a ex-Navy officer who basically get screwed over by the prospective groups and trying to work together to get back at everybody who'd wronged them for a bunch of money that they've been said to have stole, but they didn't steal it, and them trying to work it out. And it's just a bunch of crazy action scenes. These two work really well together. There's a lot of sarcastic comedy throughout this, and the banter back and forth with these Denzel Washington character and Mark Wahlberg character is fantastic. If you're in for a good action movie with characters you'll really enjoy, this is one I would recommend. This is like an 8. Alright, next up is 21 Jump Street. This is a comedy movie with Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum. It's basically about these two being sent back to high school to try to figure out a drug ring that's starting up in high school. So it's about them going back as cops to try to figure out, hey, what's going on, and trying to get the supply chain taken down. and it's basically about all their weird adventures, and there's a lot of crude comedy in this if you're not into that. But if you're into crude comedy at all, this is definitely a classic in terms of modern crude comedy classics. So I'd recommend this movie. I'd probably give it like 7.5. Last but not least, we got 3:10 to Yuma. This is a Western movie about a guy paid to get a criminal on a train that leaves at 3:10 in order to get him sent to, I think it's prison or to be executed, if I'm not mistaken. So Christian Bale plays the kind of rookie ranger or sheriff tasked with getting Russell Crowe, who plays the bad guy, onto the train. And it's about their kind of, I don't know, bond and mutual respect growing throughout this, and kind of the back and forth between the two and building of trust. About him being hunted while he's trying to save him, while also trying to kill him or imprison him by getting him on the train, while he's trying to live, while also trying to get away from him, while also needing to save him to get saved from the people hunting him. So it's a very mixed bag and a bunch of different crossings of relationship, and it's done really well. I definitely enjoyed this movie, and I'd probably give it like an 8. Thanks for watching if you stuck all the way through it. I know it's a long video, but I like to cover each movie to give, I don't know, people who haven't seen my other collection videos a little taste of what each movie's about and give my honest opinion on each movie. As I say in all my movie videos, I'm not an expert movie watcher. I'm very new into movies, and I don't really get the whole cinematography behind it and all the intricacies and like the artsy shots and stuff like that. I don't really get and appreciate it as much as somebody who's into cinematography more than me. But I enjoy a good movie, so I like talking and I like collecting them. So yeah, that was just my collection. Thanks for watching, and remember, everybody has nerdiness at their core.